Did you grow up in Knoxville, Tennessee? Do you have fond memories of some of the great establishments of this area that are no longer here? Places like Aladdin's Castle Arcade, or maybe Cass Walker's Supermarket? How about Easttown Mall, Eddie's Auto Parts, Hill's Department Store, Kay's Ice Cream? Well, then go to Knoxtalgia.com, KNOXTALGIA.com. They have the coolest vintage style t-shirts that you'll ever see, featuring some of these historic Knoxville locations. It really does bring on a sense of nostalgia when you see these t-shirts and those old logos. As you're wearing it around town, I guarantee you someone will look at that shirt, you'll make eye contact with them, and you know that they know, and they know that you know. Because if you know, you know. Head over to Knoxtalgia.com. Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Talking Indies in My Undies. My name is Jacob and I'll be your host. So FILM FEST KNOX recently put out the full festival lineup online. So you can see all the films that are going to be screening over that 2.5-day period. I know that a ton of effort goes into curating these lists for these film festivals. And I thought to myself, who would be the perfect person to speak to about this list? And it turns out that I had a contact with the artistic director of FILM FEST KNOX, a gentleman named Darren Hughes. I had actually never met Darren before, but having this opportunity to speak with him today was unbelievable. He is a true cinephile of the highest order. We're going to get into a lot of this in the podcast, but I just feel very confident in the curation of the films that are going to be screened. Getting that behind the scenes context has really opened my eyes that there is a real creativity and sort of an artistic narrative that goes into curating films for a film festival. And it's a topic that I've been curious about over the years, but never really considered on a very deep level. So talking with Darren today really gave me that opportunity to dig in and to learn a whole lot. And I think in this conversation, you will learn a whole lot and hopefully give you further context and get you more excited about FILM FEST KNOX, knowing how much energy and thought and preparation goes into these things. I don't know, it gave me a kind of a wider worldview on the topic. You know, when you look at the website and you look at the films, you get to see the descriptions. You know, yes, you get an idea of what these films are, but to speak with a key person in selecting all the films that are going to be screening and getting his perspective and getting his passion, it made me feel excited and passionate about it as well. So I am just so excited about FILM FEST KNOX, and it's just excited for you all to get to know Darren. Like I said, a true cinephile. I think in our little bubble, I'm around a lot of filmmakers, but I don't know if I know a ton of true cinephiles. And I'm really, really pleased to know at least one now. But before we get into that conversation, it's been a few years since I've done some segments on this program. That's part of the fun of having your own podcast. You can do whatever nonsense you want, and I've got some nonsense for you. There's this idea that I've been fooling around with, and it's called News from Le Noir. I'm going to play about a 5-minute clip, and the first half of that clip really just sort of sets up the town and this story that I'm trying to fool around with. And the second part is some news from that town. If you want to just get past it and get to the interview, I don't blame you one bit. But, you know, if you're here to party, let's get weird. Welcome to Le Noir, Tennessee, a town where the ordinary and the otherworldly walk hand in hand. Nestled deep in a secluded valley, it's the kind of place where the neon glow of the diner sign mingles with the shadows of the past, and the air seems a little too thick with secrets. By day, Le Noir is a quiet, sleepy town, where time moves slowly, and neighbors wave to each other from porches that haven't changed much since the 1950s. You'll find red vinyl booths at the Neon Moon Diner, Old Man Jenkins grumbling about the weather, and folks gathering at the town square to swap stories over coffee. But when the sun sets, the town takes on a different kind of life. The wind whispers through the woods. The fog rolls in thicker than molasses. The shadows slip through the streets as if they have somewhere to be. The locals say it's the ley lines, the invisible threads of energy that crisscross beneath the ground, that keep Le Noir buzzing with strange happenings. Or maybe it's just the town's way of keeping things interesting. Here it's not unusual to see Bigfoot strolling through the backwoods, Vincent the friendly vampire offering advice at the diner counter, or the occasional UFO hovering over the old farmsteads. And if you hear a strange moo coming from the field in the middle of the night, well, that's just the blue cows up to their usual antics. So pull up a chair, pour yourself a cup of something warm, and listen close, because in Lenoir, you never know what you might hear next. This is News from Lenoir, where the strange is just another day.
Welcome to News from Le Noir.
Well, it's been a week of unexpected surprises here in Lenoir, Tennessee. To kick things off, Miss Gladys Potts got the shock of her life when she went down to feed her cat and found a vampire bat nestled comfortably in Fluffy's bed. Now, this being Lenoir, folks didn't jump to the usual conclusions. Oh no, they immediately suspected Vincent the friendly vampire, who's been living in the old farmhouse on Maple Street for about, 100 years now. Vincent claims the bat's just a distant cousin, dropping by for a visit, but Gladys is still keeping her garlic wreaths up, just in case. Speaking of visitors, Bigfoot was spotted again out by Cedar Creek, this time jogging with a Fitbit. You heard that right, folks. Our beloved cryptid is apparently watching his steps these days. He's been seen on and off for years, mostly loitering around the park or occasionally scaring tourists. But now it seems he's working on his cardio. Rumor has it that Carl down at the general store sold him a Fitbit during a midnight transaction, though Carl refuses to comment, claiming customer privacy. The sheriff, for his part, is trying to figure out how a 7-foot-tall creature can blend into a crowd during the day and then vanish into thin air at night. But that's Le Noir for you. If Bigfoot's around, he's probably just trying to live his best life. Over at the Historical Society, there's been quite a stir since the discovery of what some are calling the haunted spoon. Found during the annual cemetery cleanup, this ordinary-looking spoon has been causing quite the commotion. People who have held it claim to hear ghostly whispers, and poor Miss Maple swears it made her tea stir itself the other morning. Of course, Dr. Harold, our resident expert on all things unexplainable, insists it's an ancient relic cursed by the spirits of early settlers. Personally, I think it's more likely someone just has an overactive imagination. But hey, it's Le Noir. Stranger things have happened. On the subject of strange, there's been a bit of a kerfuffle at the bakery, where Betty Jean has been experimenting with supernatural flavors. Her latest creation? Mothman muffins, complete with edible red eyes that apparently glow when you dim the lights. Now, don't ask me what's in these muffins. I'm not sure I want to know. But people are lining up to try them. Word is, they give you a boost of energy, though several folks have reported experiencing mild hallucinations. Whether that's from the muffins themselves or living in this town too long, well, that is up for debate. And in other news, the high school's Cryptid Club is hosting their annual Chupacabra Chase 5K this Saturday. For those unfamiliar, it's a fun run where participants dress up as various cryptids and sprint through the town's wooded trails, hoping not to run into the real thing. Last year, the mayor had to apologize after 3 participants went missing for several hours, only to turn up at the gas station, claiming they had been abducted by aliens. The sheriff chalked it up to dehydration and too much Red Bull, but this year they've added extra water stations along the route, just to be safe. And finally, there's been some buzz over the radio station where a mysterious broadcast interrupted the local news on Wednesday night. Listeners reported hearing a strange voice warning about imminent interdimensional travel disruptions. The signal was cut before anyone could figure out where it came from. But since then, a group of amateur ham radio operators have been combing the airwaves for more clues. Some say it's just a prank, while others, particularly Carl at the gas station, are already preparing for what he calls the inevitable timeline collapse. Either way, it's just another day in Le Noir. So that's the news from Le Noir, where vampires drop in unannounced, Bigfoot's working on his fitness, and our baked goods might send you on the trip of a lifetime. Literally. Well, there we go. News from Le Noir. Kind of fun, right? Anyways, let's get down to the reason that we're all here. Let's talk with the artistic director of FILM FEST KNOX, a fine, fine gentleman by the name of Darren Hughes on this episode of Talking Indies in My Undies.
Yeah, so my title is artistic director. That's the title I requested. It was kind of fun, like starting this thing from scratch. We sort of had an opportunity to define our roles. So like, I know you've talked to Kurt and Paul already. And then the fourth member of our little team is Kim Bumpus, who's the president of Visit Knoxville.
Yes.
So the four of us were sort of the core team that launched this project. For years, Paul, Harrell, and I programmed the public cinema here in Knoxville. I would say that I did the majority of the programming then, but Paul definitely had his hands in it too. When we started FILM FEST KNOX and when we settled on American regional cinema as our main focus, Paul, because he's a regional filmmaker and because he has closer ties to the local filmmaking community and the national filmmaking community than I do, he kind of, to his credit, sort of like took his hands out of the programming. He wanted distance between him and those decisions. So right now we're still a really small festival. It's essentially just 2.5 days. I think we have 22 screenings. The parts of the fest that are curated, I sort of take the lead on that. So I program Revival, I program International Currents, and then I do the bulk of the programming for the American Regional Cinema Competition. Basically, I spend several months watching a bunch of stuff, and then because Regal is our partner in this, I share my top, say, dozen choices with Debbie Penny, who's a programmer at Regal, and then she and I work together to sort of narrow down to the final 5.
Nice. So what is it about your backstory that got you into this position?
The shorter version of the story is, like, the first 10 years of my career, I was on these 2 parallel paths. My goal was to become an academic. And so I came to UT originally to do my PhD in the English department. I was studying 20th century American literature and film. And I thought that was what I was going to do. I thought I was just going to get my PhD and then we would move and start our real life somewhere else. But I got married very young. And so my wife and I, we didn't want to take on debt in grad school. So at the same time I was in grad school, I was also working as a designer and web developer. In the mid-90s, I'd gotten this job for a little company, and they asked me if I could figure out how to make web pages. So in 1996, that was a pretty rare skill set. I started doing that, and so for the next 10 years, I was like writing my dissertation, studying, and all this stuff, and then I was also working as a designer and writer and everything. Around 2000, I launched my own website, longpauses.com. And it was really an excuse to have like a little playground where I could play with web design ideas and then also play with my writing a little bit. I guess at that point I was like 4 or 5 years into grad school, and all of the writing that I was doing was like, seminar papers, conference papers, chapters for dissertation. It was all sort of long form in an academic style, and I was getting bored with it. And so I just wanted a place to write shorter pieces and to play with my writing. So I started writing about international cinema, mainly because it coincided with the launch of Netflix and some other mail order services. So I've always grown up in small towns and suburbs and stuff, so I'd never had access to all these movies until I could start having them mailed to me. Because of that, I was watching new international cinema for the first time, and I was writing about it, and later added a blog to it, and just because of the timing, I became one of the first people writing on the internet about that kind of stuff. And it's only part of the story now because I developed this really small audience, but that audience, a lot of those folks ended up being like editors of film journals, or they now have careers in film programming at major festivals. And so I was sort of gradually building this professional network well outside of Knoxville, sort of like all over the place. So eventually, because of those connections I was making, I started going to festivals. I started getting editors to send me to festivals. Started doing interviews. And so now I've been doing that for like 20 years. We were talking earlier before we started recording. You've got a copy of Adam Naiman's Coen Brothers book on your desk. I met Adam in Toronto 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago.
Wow.
When he was just a young, ambitious pup. Now he's got, all these great books, and But anyway, so fast forward to like 2015, and Paul Harrell and I had this opportunity. We were invited to start showing films in the auditorium at the Knoxville Museum of Art. And that sort of grew into the idea of the public cinema. After doing that for a couple of years, Paul has been working with Kurt Willis. So they had this long relationship. So when then opportunities opened up, when Keith McDaniel stepped away from the Knoxville Film Festival and there was an opening, the four of us got together and just started pitching ideas.
I did not know any of these things.
Yeah.
Do these filmmakers, they send submissions to be in Film Fest Knox, or are there some films that you actually seek out in order to be screened at that film festival?
So it varies from program to program. So the revival section and the international currents programs, those are ones that I've chosen all of those films. And we can talk a little bit more about how that happens if you're curious. But then the Made in Tennessee program and the American Regional Cinema program, we have free open submissions on Film Freeway. So each of those programs have slightly different selection processes. But like with Made in Tennessee, everything we were showing in Made in Tennessee was submitted through Film Freeway. In American Regional Cinema Competition, a lot of them ended up, the final five, a lot of them ended up in Film Freeway, but in several cases, I had reached out to the sales agent or the producers or the directors after spotting their films at South by Southwest or Tribeca or Edinburgh or whatever. I keep my eye on all the major festivals that might be premiering cool stuff.
Interesting. You had mentioned that there was a no submission fee.
Mm-hmm.
Was that strategic in some way? Because I feel like lots of film festivals, it's $50 or whatever the case may be just to submit a film. Was there a reason why you decided to take this route?
Yeah, partly it was to sort of continue the vibe of the public cinema. Paul and I had ways of raising money independently. And so then we would pay the rentals, the film screening rentals ourselves so that we could make the screenings free. Our goal has always been to be as filmmaker friendly as possible. So we asked Visit Knoxville, and Kim, is this something you're okay with? And we explained, you're exactly right. I think a lot of festivals fund their operations through submission fees, partly through submission fees. And so we asked Kim, is it okay, especially at first, if we just keep it free and open? And she was game. There's downsides to that. The first step of like the Made in Tennessee program, especially, is I keep an eye on submissions and I red flag anything that wasn't made in Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
Right. So because when you have free and open submissions, people are like, what the hell? It's, there's no risk.
Yeah.
So people submit from, this year we had a lot of submissions from Iran and China and Turkey.
Huh.
Which was strange. But people are just on Film Freeway and they see free submissions and so they give it a shot.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Gotcha. So you had mentioned public cinema a couple times. I'm not sure if all of our audience knows what that is. Can you give that a quick description of what that is?
Paul Harrell is a teacher at UT, and he used to have his end of the semester screenings at the Knoxville Museum of Art in their auditorium, which is no longer there. It always went really well. And so some of the people at the museum asked Paul, do you have any other ideas for how we could use this auditorium more? And Paul and I had been playing around with ideas for festivals for almost 10 years, probably at that point. We didn't want to step on Knoxville Film Festival, and we didn't want to step on the Horror Festival. We also didn't want to own anything. It was around the same time that the guys from Central Cinema were looking into starting their own thing. And Paul and I never wanted contracts. We never wanted any, I set up a simple little checking account, and that was the full extent of our overhead. So anyway, we found ways to raise a little bit of money. I think at our peak, we were having 3 free screenings a month at different places around town.
Wow.
And began to develop a loyal audience for it. Got to show a lot of really cool stuff. Had some interesting filmmakers come to town. COVID sort of killed it. And then around the time we wanted to start bringing it back, the museum did a renovation, got rid of their auditorium. And that always felt like home base to me. We decided not to put too much into that. And then this opportunity came along. And so now we're sort of transferring our time and energies to this instead.
I see. But you still do public cinema to some degree. Wasn't there a screening even last month at Regal?
Yeah. So year one of Film Fest Knox, all of our internal goals for Film Fest Knox in year one were like logistical. Like we wanted to make sure that our visitors had a good time. We wanted to make sure that the ticketing system worked. We wanted to make sure that the movies were playing in the right theaters at the right time. It was all about just sort of like a proof of concept in year one. So we were really pleased with how it went. So this year, one of our goals has been building an audience. So bringing more locals out. And so those screenings usually cost us $300 to $400. You know, that's about what it costs to rent a new release or a DCP. And so relatively speaking, it's a really small investment. You get a lot of bang for your buck. So we started it in the spring. Every third Wednesday of the month, we have a free screening at Regal, 7 o'clock. The first one, I think a dozen people came to. The two most recent have had in the 80 range.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so we're really pleased with that. We feel like people are finding us again. And I'm hoping that translates into ticket sales over the next month.
Absolutely. Okay, let's transition back to Film Fest Knox. You know, how would you describe Film Fest Knox in comparison to other film festivals? Is there an emphasis or is there any sort of branding or cultural element that you're looking to promote that maybe other film festivals in other regions or other states would have a different priority?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our very first conversations, and when I say our, I mean Paul's and my conversations with Kim and Kurt when we were sort of pitching ideas, one of our main points of emphasis was exactly what you said, which is that we didn't want to just have like your standard mid-sized city festival. We wanted to carve out a niche within the American festival landscape, so to speak. And so we looked for examples at places like True False in Columbia, Missouri, which is, you know, Columbia is similar to Knoxville. It's even a little bit smaller, but that festival grew out of the University of Missouri, has a really strong connection with the university. They focused on cinema that is sort of blurs the line between fiction and narrative filmmaking. Had such great programming there and invested in bringing filmmakers there and building this great festival so that now True False is like a world launching point. So they get great premieres there. So we wanted something like that. We were kind of like, so what is our thing? Like, and we're looking around. It's like the New Orleans Film Festival is great. That's going on this weekend. Indie Memphis in Memphis has been a great festival, especially over the last 5 or 6 years. It's become a premier showcase of like Black American cinema. So we were like, what is our thing? We settled on the idea of regional cinema. So our catchphrase is we showcase and advocate for personal, ambitious regional cinema. It was partly out of our own personal enthusiasm. Paul is a regional filmmaker and knows that community and knows the struggles of making regional cinema. And also it was very practical, which was, I asked Kurt Willis straight up, like, what does Visit Knoxville and the Knoxville Film Office need? And he's like, Darren, we're really great at local filmmaking productions in the $5 million and under range. And so I was like, great, well, let's have a festival that draws regional filmmakers and regional film producers to town for a weekend that are making films in that. So what we want ultimately is for Knoxville in November to be the place where for 3 days, professionals who are making regional cinema at this budget level and with this kind of personal ambition are meeting in Knoxville and networking with each other. You know, if we're showing great films and the locals love it too, that's great also. Like that's absolutely top 5 reasons for doing this. But we also just really want to build this great community where the best in the business are coming to Knoxville and networking with us and with each other.
So let's talk a little bit about the programming for this year. I know that probably a lot of these films mean a lot to you, but are there any standouts that you would like to discuss with our audience today?
You know, I've been going to festivals for a long time, and there are certain things that I love about film festivals that I wanted to recreate here. It doesn't happen so much like at Toronto or San Francisco or even South by Southwest. But when I go to Rotterdam or Berlin, one of my favorite things about it is I'm watching great premieres, but then I can also walk over to a theater and watch like a pre-code American comedy from the 1930s. Like there's also repertory program built into it. And I think that's important for festivals. I think festivals are a place where you can expand audience's notion of film history and how old films talk to new films and stuff. So this year with the Revival program, we're showing 4 classics of regional cinema. We're showing Barbara Loden's Wanda, which is one of the greatest films ever made, and it's probably the great Appalachia film. We're showing Let's Scare Jessica to Death on Friday night, which is one of my favorite American horror films. We're showing Northern Lights, which was made in North Dakota in the 1970s, and it's this really wonderful film about politics of 1915 North Dakota, but it won that Palme d'Or at Cannes in 1978, and it's just been recently restored. So the restoration just premiered at the New York Film Festival 2 weeks ago, and I think maybe we're the next screening. Yeah, and then we're also showing Desert Hearts by Donna Deitch, which is like one of the first great independent queer regional films. It's about a sort of English professor in the 1950s who goes to get her divorce in Reno and ends up falling in love with this young woman there locally. It's just an amazing, amazing film. So you're right. Like at this point, I do kind of love all the films we're showing, but I just love that I'm able to like have that kind of retrospective programming in the midst of everything else. The International Currents program was designed basically as an excuse to show in Knoxville some of the best stuff from the big festivals of the year that wouldn't screen in Knoxville otherwise. And last year it was very heavily international cinema. This year we're showing one movie I would just encourage people to go to see because it's fun. It's called EEPHUS, EEPHUS. And it's by a young American filmmaker named Carson Lund, who shot in New England. But it's basically, it's about these middle-aged men who have been playing baseball, this adult league baseball league. And they're playing their last game before their local baseball field gets bulldozed for a new school. It's essentially like a real-time movie where like they're just trying to finish the game before they lose the light, and it's just a hangout movie. I love that one a lot. We're showing Dahomey by Madi Diop, who's a great African filmmaker. This is a really strange movie about the return of some African pieces that were in French museums and that are being sort of repatriated back to Dahomey.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other one I'll just throw, we're closing out the festival with a crazy movie called The Empire by Bruno Dumont, who's a French filmmaker I love. And he's made this movie that's kind of a spoof of Star Wars and Dune, but he's also a regional filmmaker. He's from this like small town in the northwest corner of France. He makes all of his films there. And he works with locals, mostly non-professional actors. And so to make like this big sci-fi satire, it also has a little Spaceballs in it. It's like it's a crazy movie.
It sounds wild. Like, how are the effects in that in comparison to like, The Force Awakens or whatever?
Well, they're not the level of The Force Awakens, but they're better than I was expecting.
No kidding.
And very cool. Yeah.
Well,
very cool.
I come from a background of no budget or super low budget filmmaking. And, part of the fun of that is being clever in order to make up for the lack of resources that you have. So hearing stories about that makes me very excited to see this.
One of the things I would love to see happen as the festival grows is to see more integration between the cinephiles and movie buffs of Knoxville with the people who are making movies in Knoxville. And so, like, I would love people who are competing in the elevator pitch competition to watch The Empire, just as like inspiration. Again, like, there's no difference between Bayou, France, where Bruno Dumont makes his films, and like the rurals of East Tennessee. I mean, it's the same kind of challenge. It's the same thing of like looking at our particular landscape and finding ways to make it beautiful or strange or whatever. So yeah, I really want International Currents and Revival to be sources of inspiration for our local filmmakers so that they can steal ideas and find new sources of inspiration. Very,
very cool. So let's talk about another section of the festival, and that's the kind of the regional stuff. When it comes to submissions for that, what's that submission process? And do you have any advice for any of the filmmakers who are submitting that would help them to get their film in a festival such as this?
I can describe my thought process as I'm reviewing stuff, which is, again, sort of like coming back to that idea of personal, ambitious regional cinema. Personal means nobody else could tell this story. This is like a story that has come from your experience, your imagination. It's not something that we've seen 100 times. And ambitious means, I don't know, you're taking risks. One of the ways I think of it is like, and this is kind of my evaluation criteria generally, is like, was the concept of the film ambitious and interesting? And did you pull it off? When it comes to the submission and review process, I think we had like 75 submissions, somewhere around there in Film Freeway. Again, a lot of them were immediately disqualified because they just didn't fit our basic criteria.
They came from Iran or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then I did go out and recruit some films. One of my goals with that program is to include a diversity along several different metrics. So like, I want to see different parts of the country. I want to see different genres and styles, and I want to see different types of stories. There were several really good films that were seriously considered, but that were enough like a film that I liked a little bit better, that I sort of set the first one aside and chose number 2 instead. So for example, like one of the facts about regional cinema at this budget level is that a lot of them are made by people in their 30s, because you're old enough to have had an experience and to have a couple short films under your belt, but you might not have a mortgage yet or children or whatever. So you have like the freedom to make these films. And the downside of that is that I saw a lot of films that are about 30-year-olds who are sort of struggling to like become adults. And some of them were good. Some of them were really funny. They're playing at good festivals. But to me, they were just like, I've seen this story enough that I don't think I need to see it again. Or I would rather use my 5 limited slots for different kinds of stories.
Yeah. So for a lot of the local people, there is the Made in Tennessee programming that is happening at Film Fest KNOX. And I know a lot of our listeners are curious about that. So what went into the selection process for that section of the festival?
Made in Tennessee is the only program where we have like a separate independent selection committee. And we did that last year too. And it was very intentionally done to create a level of separation between Kurt Willis as one of the producers of the festival and the process for selecting, like which local filmmakers are going to screen in the local fest. We know that's a big deal. We take it really seriously. And so Made in Tennessee has the most elaborate selection process. About a week before the submission window ends, I block off about a week and I go through and I watch everything. I don't watch every minute of everything, but I take a first look at everything. And I will eliminate a few things just because either they don't fit the general voice of Film Fest KNOX, or because I just don't think that they're up to the quality standards, given that like last year we only had 1 shorts program. This year we're going to have 2. So we don't have that many slots to play with. And so I'm okay as artistic director of like making that first pass and kind of going, it might be an interesting film, but it's not the right fit for us. And the best example of that for people who are curious is we're recording just as the Knoxville Horror Fest is wrapping up this weekend. And those guys, we love those guys. They've been doing this a lot longer than we have. And so I'm fine with like saying Knoxville Horror Fest is where horror and those types of genre films play. And so like I will do a pass and I often eliminate certain kinds of like, like the fun splatter fest that people are making with friends. I'll sort of like remove those from the pool. And then basically we eventually get it down to like this year we have 6 hours and 20 minutes of Made in Tennessee programming. By the time I had made that first pass through it, we were down to about 14 and a half hours for under consideration, which is still a lot of programming. I basically give the 4 members of the selection committee access to those remaining films, and I give each of them a spreadsheet, and I just ask them to put yes, no, or maybe for each one. So they spend about 2 weeks watching everything, rating everything yes, no, or maybe after the submission window's closed. Based on those responses, I got it down to about 9 hours. So we eliminated about 5.5 hours through that phase. And then the 5 of us just got together one night for drinks and talked for like 2 or 3 hours and talked through every movie and finally settled on, I think it was 2 features and 20 short films, I think is what ended up in the Made in Tennessee program. Yeah. And we were overwhelmed and really pleasantly surprised by, I think we expected the quantity of submissions to go up, but we were really happy with the quality this year too. They're really good films.
Great.
They're really good films.
That's a lot of films for you personally to be watching. Where do you find the time?
It's my hobby. So if I weren't watching stuff for Film Fest KNOX, I'd be watching something else. Yeah. So it's, evenings after the kids are in bed.
Since we're kind of on this track for a second, what else are you watching besides stuff that's in this programming for the Film Fest KNOX? Have you seen anything else that's interesting that maybe you would like to have screened here or not? But just what's gotten you excited lately?
Oh, that's a fun question. Like we're at the phase now where less than 4 weeks from today will be the last day of Film Fest KNOX. So we're in the final stages of just like the logistics. So I'm not getting to watch anything right now. But last month I did go to Toronto for the film festival, watched movies for 7 or 8 days. And it's interesting. I've been programming now, if you count the public cinema, I've been programming for almost a decade. And this program was harder to put together than ever before, partly because just the industry is at a very strange place right now. So like one of the reasons we chose November for Film Fest Knox is because I wanted to be 4 to 5 weeks after the New York Film Festival, because then the movies that premiered at Cannes and Venice and Berlin and Toronto, they would have their American premiere in New York, and then they're available for other smaller fests after they already have their big US premiere. And that was definitely the case last year. Like International Currents and Revival came together in like an afternoon because I had this checklist of movies that I wanted, and I was able to get them all. This year, I don't know how like inside baseball we want to get, but like it was just really strange. I saw several movies in Toronto that I liked a lot. I had planned on doing a whole little program of films by a Chinese director named Jia Zhangke, who I think is like the greatest, most important filmmaker of the 21st century.
Whoa.
And
okay.
I just couldn't get his movie.
Okay.
And that happened a couple times. There were a half dozen movies that I really expected to get when I was coming home from Toronto that I couldn't. I'm very happy with our program, but it was there was more like wrestling than in the past. But to answer your question, a couple movies that I really loved is Jem Cohen is an American filmmaker who was we also did some programming for Big Ears Festival over the years, and we did a spotlight on Jem in 2018, I think it was. He's got a new movie about astronomy that I really loved. Wasn't able to get. You know, there's a new Mike Leigh movie out called Hard Truths that was great. Saw that in Toronto. David Cronenberg has a new movie called The Shrouds out that these are I'm rattling through the names of movies that I kind of wanted and wasn't able to get.
What about Joseph Kahn's Ick? Did you see that in Toronto?
I didn't. I think it played in Midnight Madness, if I'm not mistaken.
It's more of a genre thing, I think.
Yeah. But that does remind me, one of the films I didn't mention earlier that I am excited about is this movie called The Damned that we're showing on Saturday afternoon. It's by Roberto Minervini, who is fascinating. He's born in Italy, came to the US for graduate school, I think. And over the past 15 years or so, I think he's become maybe the most, to me, the most interesting regional filmmaker, like in the art world. He lived in Houston for a while. So he makes these very politically engaged movies. And his new movie that we're showing is called The Damned. And it's about a battalion of Union soldiers who have been sent to protect the Western Front. I think it was shot in Montana. Beautiful, just absolutely beautiful landscape. I mean, the movie's called The Damned, so you can kind of guess the fate of this battalion.
Yes.
That's not a spoiler, but it's this really fascinating movie where he works with non-professional actors and they are speaking with like a 21st century psychology. So they're not, well, back in, like they're not putting on the affect of like what we imagine Civil War soldiers to be.
Right.
They're just like 21st century Americans playing Civil War soldiers and having these conversations, trying to imagine the rationale for fighting in the war, or, what is the meaning of honor? What's the meaning of fighting for freedom? And so obviously these are resonant questions in 2024. It's a fascinating movie. Roberto can't come, but three of the actors are going to be here. It's actually a father and his two sons who play a father and two sons in the movie. So they're going to be here. I can't wait to meet them and hear them talk about the film afterwards.
That's really cool. Yeah, that's another thing that I'm not sure everyone's aware of. Lots of the filmmakers or actors from these films are coming into town for this event.
Yeah.
So that's a fun thing. Is there
Yes.
a number of these films where the actors or producers, directors will be coming in town?
Yes. I'm so glad this came up because, especially for folks who are listening, who are in production, like we're bringing heavy hitters. There's going to be a regional cinema panel on, this is the Saturday morning one. So it's going to be Saturday at 10 at the hotel at the Hyatt, right before the elevator pitch screenings. And I really encourage people to go. The panel is going to be moderated by Scott McCauley, who is the founding editor of Filmmaker magazine and has also an award-winning film producer.
Wow.
I mean, Scott is like a legend in the business. I was so happy he just wanted to come, but that he's also moderating this workshop is going to be crazy.
Amazing. Yeah.
I know people have been killing themselves for the last couple of weeks to finish up their elevator pitch films. The jury for that is insane. Like it's Kelly Williams was here last year. He was part of the regional cinema jury last year. And he had so much fun. He wanted to come back. And we were happy to have him. Independent Spirit Award-winning producer. Taylor Shung is also going to be on that jury. She's another award-winning producer. She was a producer on Nomadland, which, Best Picture winner. She was also a producer on Past Lives, which was nominated for an Oscar. All of the American regional cinema films have at least one person coming in. In one case, we're actually hosting the world premiere of The World Drops Dead by Brandon Colvin. So he'll be here along with 3 of his producers who work in Alabama and Tennessee generally. Yeah, so almost every film outside of International Currents and Revival will have guests there.
That's so cool.
It's going to be fun. Maybe 30 out-of-town guests this year.
Wow.
It'll be cool.
That's exciting. Something else that's exciting is really the opening night of a festival. That's really where you're setting the stage. It's the big celebration. Can you talk to us a little bit about the opening night this year?
Yeah. Our long-term goal is to build to the point where we can have like the classic, like red carpet thing, huge celebrities or whatever. Like it would be fun to get to that point.
Absolutely.
One of my dreams for opening night is to, since we're like this American regional fest, is to like bring in like the big names of regional cinema. Like my dream is to have like Richard Linklater come and, show one of his films and be like an opening featured guest or whatever.
Yeah.
As part of that, the move in that direction, this year we're having an opening night film, which is called All That We Love. It's directed by Yen Tan, who is a very well established name as a director and editor and designer. He was part of that like David Lowery team. So he's worked with David for years. This film is just a lot of fun. It stars Margaret Cho as a middle-aged woman who is about to become like an empty nester. And her at the beginning of the film, this isn't a spoiler, her dog dies. And it just sort of throws her life into a bit of emotional chaos. And then her ex-husband returns. It's just a real like crowd-pleasing movie. If anybody's listening and they're sort of on the fence about coming, just on Friday night, come on Friday night and see Griffin in Summer, which I think screens at like 5:45 or 6, which is one of the American Regional Cinema Competition films and is just delightful. And then go see All That We Love. And you're just going to see 2 really great crowd pleasers back to back.
I also encourage everyone to go out there. I will definitely be out there this year. I wanted to end on something that's a little more fun, a little more silly. I want us to use our imaginations for a moment. And I want us to imagine that aliens come to Earth and the Galactic Council has reached out to you, Darren, and said, we need to explain what film is to these aliens. You get 5 movies that are going to be screened for these aliens. They've never seen a movie before. They don't know what it is. You get 5. What are some contenders for this list to screen to these aliens?
So the first one that comes to mind, it's an obvious choice, but is Singing in the Rain, which is like the Hollywood studio system at its peak. You can just point at Gene Kelly and go like, this is called a movie star. Every time he's on the screen, all you want to do is look at Gene Kelly. And then it also has some of the like greatest dance scenes. It has great music scenes. And then it ends with that Broadway melody section, which is almost avant-garde. It's so bizarre and technicolor and bright and beautiful. So Singing in the Rain would definitely be there.
It's a great choice.
I would say Sherlock Jr. by Buster Keaton, which if you've never seen, I'm sure it's on YouTube. It's a movie where Buster plays a movie theater projectionist, and he's also he's like got this girlfriend that he wants to marry. And at one point he falls asleep while projecting this crime movie and sort of projects himself into the film.
Huh.
And so it's like, considering this is like 30 years after like the creation of cinema, he's doing so much experimental work, and it's also just hilarious. That would be on there.
Wow, cool.
I would want to show a full experimental film. So I would probably show Mothlight by Stan Brakhage. Stan Brakhage was a great American experimental filmmaker, maybe the greatest. And Mothlight is a film that he made by collecting moth wings and translucent leaves and taping them to 16 millimeter film and then running that through a printer. And then, so as you're watching the film, what you're actually watching is this abstract thing, which is light passing through translucent moth wings and leaves.
Is there any sort of narration or music, or is it just
No,
image?
It's just image.
Wow.
It's stunning. Yeah. So yeah, for the experimental slot, I would show either Mothlight or Wavelength, which does kind of the same thing for sound, by Michael Snow. I mentioned Jia Zhangke earlier. I'd be tempted to show his movie Still Life. That's one of the films I'd still need to find an excuse to screen it here in town. It's from 2006, and one of the reasons I say Jia Zhangke is, like, to me, one of the most important filmmakers of the 21st century is, first of all, feels like China is the nation of the 21st century in some ways. And he's been documenting that change. So he grew up in a very small village at the end of the Cultural Revolution. He's now like in his early 50s. And so he has witnessed, it's like parts of China have evolved 500 years in 40 years.
Wow.
And so he's been sort of documenting this. And Still Life is partly about the creation of the Three Gorges Dam project, which flooded whole regions of China. It's got a nice little East Tennessee connection there because it's very similar to like the TVA projects of 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So Still Life would be on my list. And then I'll tie it up with a Film Fest Knox connection. I would show Wanda, which is playing in our revival section, because it's a radical film made by a woman filmmaker. Basically, the film is about the lead character, Wanda, lives in a small coal town in Western Pennsylvania, Northern Appalachia. And as the movie starts, she's basically lost. She's abandoned her husband and children and is completely sort of lost in the wilderness and takes up with a petty criminal. And it's just about a woman who has like no power and no agency in her life, just trying to survive. And so I would tell the aliens, like, film can also do this. It can have like almost like a social purpose or a novelistic purpose where it's teaching us about the lives of people who we would never maybe run into in our daily lives.
Well, very, very cool, Darren. This was a lot of fun. Thank you for coming over and having this conversation with me.
I appreciate it, man. And I hope everyone will turn out next month. It'll be fun.
Well, there we go. Darren Hughes, that was so cool, right? Man, I learned a lot about Film Fest Knox and all the effort that goes into it, all the thought processes behind it, for the stuff that we actually see, the actual films. Should I encourage everyone to hop online, go to filmfestknox.com, check out the tickets, figure out, what you're comfortable with. If you want to go to, a single day, if you want to get a full festival pass, come out. It's very, very rare that we get the opportunity to see these types of films in Knoxville, curated by a true cinephile like Darren. So I encourage everyone to get some tickets, and I look forward to seeing you out there. But until then, I hope everything continues to go well for you and in your life, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.